You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by
Tracy McMillan with Nelson Nygaard.
Hey, Tracy. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Jeff?
I'm great. We haven't seen you for a little while. How was your summer?
My summer has been good. Yeah, busy. Have I talked to you since we returned from our epic RV trip in June?
Well, I don't think we've talked about your epic RV trip either. So I think folks would want to hear about that. But also, has something exciting happened after the RV trip?
No, I mean, just the usual summer kind of stuff. No, not really.
Yeah.
just yes, summer musings and work and all that. And then now summer is done. School has started for my son, and now you're just back to the regular.
Does it feel like the routine in the fall, like the fall feelings, have they started? Like we started thinking about Halloween decorations. That's what we were, our fall feelings.
I did buy my annual bag of autumn mix, candy corn product that I really shouldn't buy.
Yep.
At Target.
So you're a pro candy corn.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am too. I know a lot of people that aren't. They think that it's like the death of things and it should be banished from the earth. But I love candy corn. I can't eat as much as probably I used to, but
Yes, I buy that bag of autumn mix, and then I really should only eat an eighth of it. And sometimes I do. Like I'll eat that much, and then eventually, a few weeks later, I'll throw it away, which is what I typically did with Halloween candy all growing up. But I don't know. We're still in COVID times, so I may eat the whole bag.
Little bonuses. Yeah. I'm looking forward to Halloween where I can buy like a whole bag of Reese's peanut butter cups for myself too.
That's right.
That's positive.
Do you think you'll get trick-or-treaters this year?
Maybe. I'm not sure. We didn't get. We might not have been here last year for Halloween. Can't remember. Or if we were just inside. I think maybe we were just inside because everybody was inside. Yeah. But usually we don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters. There's Fair Oaks is like 2 blocks away, this street. It was the major thoroughfare for trick-or-treating. I mean, thousands of people would be down there. And so they didn't really come by the house except for if they were my neighbors. So usually unless they were cutting through to try to get down to Fair Oaks from 24th Street, people really wouldn't come up here. But I'd be standing outside with candy and dressed up. I had a blast. And I'd talk to my neighbors and stuff. But it wasn't really something that we had to worry about too much. At some point, maybe I'll put like a chalk line or something like that, so people coming from 24th can come down the street, and I'll get a ton of candy so that we can give out candy to the kids. Because that's the best part is the kids with the costumes. They're super cute.
Well, you got to up your lights and decorations to like blare out that this is the house. Yeah,
we've got some ideas this year. Before put much stuff out. I had a pumpkin, but that was about it. But now we're gonna. I think we're gonna go kind of nuts with some Halloween decorations. I'm looking forward to that. A lot of stuff that I am looking forward to this year. Even if kids don't come, they're still going to be there.
Exactly.
So hopefully it'll have a lot of fun. Yeah. So.
And just to close the loop on your question, yes, the pumpkins are in the autumn mix.
Okay, yeah, I like those pumpkins. They're the kind of candy corn is kind of cool looking, but the pumpkins are the cool looking. So what else is in there? Is there like leaves and stuff like this kind of?
No, it's the candy corn, the pumpkins, and then the candy corn with the chocolate brown Tootsie Roll kind of flavor.
Oh yeah. Okay, I gotcha. I know that one too.
Just those three. But the leaves would be cool.
Let us know how you feel about candy corn. I'd love to hear your opinions. theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I know it's a love-hate thing for some people. Some people love it, some people hate it. Well, another exciting thing, I built a computer this weekend.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so my computer crashed, my desktop computer. So my laptop had crashed in December, and I got a new laptop, which is how I'm talking to you right now. And then that data was complete. The data is gone. I saved a bunch of stuff. I backed up stuff, but I lost a couple of episodes that never were to be returned. And
The one that we recorded that was awesome that went away.
it was probably in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Even though
yes.
it was up in the ether, whichever
Yeah.
one, what was that, episode 21 or something like that? I
It's
still
fantastic.
I still labeled it as episode 21 because
I
it
know.
exists, even though it doesn't. I have no idea where it went and what it happened.
Such a
And
great conversation.
it was the best conversation we ever had. And we'll have better ones in the future, I'm sure, but I'll make sure to record that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so the desktop crashed finally. I mean, I'd had the computer since I worked at RA. Yeah, so I took it with me home after RA disappeared, and so it finally crashed. It was one that I had somebody build for me before, and it lasted 8-9 years. So I was like, well, computers are there's a chip shortage, I guess, around the world and things like that, and computers take a long time to get to you. So even if I bought one from Dell or Lenovo or whoever else, it would have gotten to me in October. So I was like, why don't I just why don't I just build another computer? So I bought the parts that were said online you need to build a computer, and then we built it. And that was a really interesting experience building a computer. But it works, and I'm super excited about it. I'm just waiting for one cord to hook in my second monitor, but other than that, it's pretty much done. So it's crazy.
That's awesome.
I never thought myself a computer builder. My nephew does. He's a computer builder, but I've never really thought. I mean, I guess when I was in college in the late 90s, I had to install like an Ethernet card into my computer because they weren't such a big thing at that point.
Yeah.
And I remember fiddling inside and adding it in, and really excited when it worked. But other than that, I hadn't really done much in my computer since then. So I'm glad I finally got to kind of, and Nancy helped me a lot, obviously, but I finally got this thing put together that I have a new computer.
Yeah, the most building of a computer that I've done is, hitting the radio button to indicate what storage level I want when I'm ordering one. It's the extent of building that I've done. But
Yeah.
I mean, I know that my son has friends that have built their computer, so he's been talking about that for his next computer.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, and you can get the parts. It'll cost about the same as general. I mean, actually, it'll cost a little bit more, but you get more. Like I got more memory than I possibly could have at the same price point, and then I also got probably not as good of a video card, but I don't really need a big video card anymore.
Right.
I used to do a lot of mapping and GIS and data stuff that I don't do as much anymore, so that wasn't a big deal. But putting it all together, just like quality parts, and it'll last longer. So instead of a 5-year computer, I'll have an 8 to 10-year computer. I'm super excited about that. So I don't know, just like a life goal met, I guess. Build a computer. Build a computer. Figure out how to install Windows on a CPU, and keep going. So that was my exciting news. Well, this is episode 96. We are in session. So before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts if it's working currently. Make sure you subscribe to this so you don't miss an episode. And subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. And thanks to folks who subscribe to the podcatchers. It's awesome you guys keep coming back. We really do appreciate it. So let's get to the news, shall we? The engineers that protected New Orleans in Time magazine. The city of New Orleans was spared flooding and major damage from Hurricane Ida, in part because billions of dollars of investments made in flood protection by the Army Corps of Engineers. We've since found out that the protections were built stronger than might have been allowed at the time by using 200-year rather than 100-year estimates for future storm strength. And this was by Alejandro de la Garza in Time magazine. So they didn't really fudge the numbers. They just went on a 200-year storm rather than a 100-year storm. What did you think of this story? I thought it was really interesting thinking about protections and kind of having to, quote unquote, fudge the numbers to get it right.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, we always talk about data and analysis and also, what are the adaptations we're making over time? And I think that was what was really the takeaway for me from this article, in terms of conditions have changed, but yet are we still using the same methodology and variables and formula and sense to calculate something that we haven't adapted based on changes in context, environmental conditions, transportation, land use conditions. I don't know what goes into the calculation of a 100-year flood vulnerable location, but obviously it needs to be adapted in some way to be addressing the the changes to the environment that make places more vulnerable.
I think you make a good point because, thinking about the past and what's gone on in the past, especially with climate change approaching stronger and stronger every year and even already being here for that matter. What we've learned in the past is not going to be something that we can use to predict the future. And so if you go off these 100-year floodplain maps that were built before climate change even was a thought, and a lot of the floodplain maps haven't been updated for a really long time.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Using the past to predict the future is really kind of nonsensical. So thinking about these, especially when we have these, and we've talked about this on the show many times, is when we have these 100-year events, 4 times in 20 years, it's not really a 100-year flood anymore. And so, they're going to have to really strengthen what they think is a 200-year, 250-year, or even just a larger magnitude of hurricane or flooding events, especially in places like New Orleans, which is already underwater. I mean, they can take a lot, like they said in the article, from the Dutch, who actually have, in some instances, done 10,000-year
that was amazing.
things. And it's like, okay, well, they're just on another plane of existence there. We're thinking 100, 200-year. They're thinking 10,000 year. And I think that's a huge difference between kind of the planning that's going on with the Dutch at the current moment and with places like New Orleans or places along the Gulf Coast, which should really be thinking about, maybe at least 5,000 years. I don't know. That 100 year isn't going to cut it, especially if you're planning for these higher levees and it worked. What they did worked. So there's actually maybe a positive feedback loop from that too.
I took a little issue with how the article ended up being written and, writer, editor, whatever, in terms of suggesting that the numbers weren't, disprove the idea that the numbers weren't accurate. Whereas what the researcher was saying was essentially, you work within it's a sensitivity analysis, and those typically involve some ranges. And so they've chosen to go at one end of the range as opposed to the median or the other end of the range. That is normal scientific procedure. So they could have done a service by explaining that as opposed to suggesting some nefarious.
It's always the headline writer, right? It's always the person that's like, let's get something, get people to read it, which, that it pulled me in. I was, the engineers that had to fudge the numbers to save New Orleans, but it was actually just a really conservative estimate on the range of things. And if you read the article, that's what it says. But if you read the headline, it's like, it's amazing that they went outside the boundaries. It's a very kind of, it's a very American individualistic story, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Right? From that headline.
Yeah.
Which is really, really interesting.
Lily out of my office so that she doesn't bark like that anymore.
Oh, I didn't even hear.
You didn't hear? Oh my
No.
gosh. Resounding bark.
Oh, there it is. Another thing that gets me from this article, though, is that can we spend money on climate change adaptation now? I mean, can we do that? I mean, so you're in Phoenix, and there's actually a New York Times article today about heat and the changes in summer nights in Phoenix, about how there are more of them, obviously, and how it's hotter. That's climate change, obviously. Can we start to think about these things and spend more money? I mean, they made a conservative estimate and decided to spend money because they knew something was coming. Can we do that now? Is it allowed? I mean, we are talking about this infrastructure bill, we're talking about reconciliation, and people are still denying that there is a climate change problem on the horizon.
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, if we get into denialism as a whole, that's a long episode or series, really. I think we talked about it earlier in the year. I mean, there is some level of hope with the change in administration, and even seeing the folks that are now part of USDOT that have been brought on. I have a lot of hopeful, because I know the philosophy that's going to be at least put forth and hopefully lead to some policy and some funding change. But I also hope that we create something that is less vulnerable to administrative manipulation and changes. So if we are making an investment, and I mean, it's hard. I think that polls would show that the general public wants these changes, but the vocal minority and those in power, as always, are dictating what's happening, as opposed to doing anything for the the public good and listening to the majority.
Well, I think it'll get people sooner or later. So hopefully they wake up sooner if they're not on board already. And a lot of people are getting on board, and I appreciate that. Let's go to something a little bit more positive. Lighter. It's still along the same veins of climate change, but it's a little bit lighter. Solarpunk and the end of capitalism. Maybe that's not as light. Solarpunk, a futuristic urban aesthetic inspired by steampunk and cyberpunk, is an optimistic vision of a future society that operates on renewable energy. While the clean images imagine a society where solar roofs and windmills generate clean energy, it's also a vision for an end to the capitalist system that created the environmental crisis we currently see. So this was by Hannah Steinkopf-Frank in Motherboard. Motherboard's really been doing some really interesting reporting lately, especially with Aaron Gordon and some of the other folks that are over there writing. But I'd never heard of Solarpunk. Have you ever heard of Solarpunk before this?
I hadn't. I've heard of steampunk, but I hadn't heard of solarpunk. So it is really interesting. I meant to ask my son about it because it is referencing, that took reference, or early in the article it referenced Studio Ghibli and some other aspects of anime, and so I thought it was very interesting. But I was like, whoa, it's an area that I don't know anything about, but it sounds fascinating.
Well, I guess it's been going on for a while now.
Yeah.
And obviously steampunk and cyberpunk are a thing that I think a lot of folks understand and know about, but I hadn't heard of the combination between the two. Steampunk being kind of like a turn of the modern world from an agrarian society kind of aesthetic where people are wearing goggles and operating in balloons, but it's also kind of a mechanical operation. I think you can imagine what steampunk might be like if you think about kind of the 1850s, 1860s, and the kind of the onset of the Industrial Revolution and kind of the aesthetic of that time tied with like a more technological thing. And then there's cyberpunk, which is a whole other thing. The main thing for these folks seems to be that, and the people that believe in solarpunk, there's this greenwashing aspect of environmental issues that they're trying to avoid. And so they want people to set up these communities that are very eco-friendly, they're sustainable, they're part of the circular system, but they're also not kind of washing over some of the issues that are causing climate change, that are causing these issues that we're having to kind of solve through this kind of aesthetic, through this technology. I think that's kind of an interesting aspect to it as well, is that a lot of times we have these kind of techno-utopian or techno-optimistic views of society, but we don't address like kind of what's causing the need for that techno-utopianism, right? So this environmentalism comes from a feeling of there's something going wrong in the world and we need to fix it. We can fix it through this aesthetic kind of idealism, but it can't be greenwashed, or it can't be like solarpunk washed.
Right.
They reference in the article a Chobani ad, which I guess had some aspects of solarpunk in it, and people kind of waved it off a little bit, but some people weren't very happy with it because they felt like it was co-opting the argument. Like many times, once an argument gets popular, it gets co-opted by a number of different groups, and then it loses kind of its meaning. It kind of reminds me lately of the idea of your carbon footprint. I know that this is an article or a piece that's come up a number of times lately where the discussion about oil companies actually coming up with carbon footprint idea to kind of deflect from their own responsibility and to put it back on their consumers. So that type of kind of greenwashing they're trying to avoid to a certain extent, I feel like, in this kind of aesthetic, this idea of solarpunk.
Yeah.
A central tenet of solarpunk, it says, is not being afraid of how the world will change and the adaptations that must be made. And I just really thought that was interesting. I hope folks get a chance to read it and take a look at it. I don't know if I can explain it clearly because it's just such a new thing to me, but it's something that I definitely wanted to talk about a little bit because it's out of the ordinary. And considering all of the dystopian novels and television shows and zombie movies and stuff, this might be like kind of a more clean-cut futuristic view, maybe more utopian Jetsons than utopian Walking Dead.
Yeah, I also appreciated the different ways in which, like the discussion of video games and the different mediums that are available and being utilized now to share information, good and bad. And so the discussion about the video game that's been created, Project Violacia, I probably did not pronounce that right, and I apologize, discussing what says what freedom looks like, what compromise must be made for that future. For thinking about ways to get in front of different individuals, that's important.
Well, shall we talk about Legos?
Oh, yeah.
Using Lego to sell a city budget. City staffers in Arlington, Texas created a stop-motion video detailing the city's $552 million budget, complete with Legos. The video, which uses Lego city scenes and budget specifics explained by minifigures, has since gone viral, attracting over 700,000 views and attention from media outlets around the country. This was by Francesca Gariano at the Today Show. Well, this took off. I mean, this, I don't know if you saw this in regular circulation. I didn't. I just found it through my kind of general news search. But it's pretty crazy that Lego is so mainstream that now they're making budget videos for cities out of it.
I thought it was really interesting. I hadn't seen it before. I watched the whole video after reading the article, and it was a really interesting use of Legos to share the message on the annual budget process, and it was informative for sure. And I love that this was a city that the communications manager had built. It wasn't clear that it necessarily looked, I don't think it looks like Arlington.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's just a city he built.
It's their vision of Arlington maybe in the future.
With lots of brick knobs.
Yeah. It was cute. I mean, obviously we're a Lego family, and so I appreciate that.
I've always loved Legos. I have several boxes of them in the basement, and many of them up here, Star Wars versions in the main part of the house. But do you feel like you learned anything from watching the video though? I feel like I was watching just kind of the Lego guy go by, and some of the explanations and stuff, but I don't know. I couldn't quite feel like I couldn't quite tell if it's like a gimmick or if it actually worked.
I don't know. I guess I paid attention to the content they were sharing. Maybe because the Lego seemed like the Lego movie, so it seemed normal. It didn't jump out at me or distract me in any way. But what did jump out to me is how much of the city budget goes to public safety, and looking at the distribution of public funds in different categories. So that was interesting. And it was great to see it and for them to talk about the sources of funds. I thought it was for thinking about, again, thinking about different ways, different channels and different mechanisms and different genres in a sense to use to try to get people to engage with information and to learn from it. This was certainly an innovative way.
Now that you've seen that, have you ever thought of doing like a project proposal using Lego?
Wow, that would be that would be. No, I have not thought about that. Do you watch Ted Lasso?
I do, yeah.
Did you see Friday's episode?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. And so the minute she was, the beginning, riding the bike and everything like that, tooling along very happily, although with her headphones in.
Yep.
I was like, there's going to be a crash.
Yeah, exactly. When I saw the headphones, I was like, that's not good.
Yeah. This is not going to end well. And luckily it didn't end as badly as I thought it was going to. But maybe use Ted Lasso too. Some of our proposals. No, I don't know. Yeah, no, I don't think I would necessarily incorporate Legos into the proposal, like interview stage. But James Rojas uses with his playset work, using Legos or something, building blocks like Legos have been part of that program.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, I mean, what he does is really great, kind of giving people the ability to imagine spaces on their own without kind of a preconceived notion of what already exists. I think the beauty of James's work, and we obviously had James on the show a few years ago, I think, but the beauty of it is kind of allowing people to have an imagination and not kind of making them focus on the numbers or the specifics of a place automatically. And I think that's kind of where sometimes things go off the rails because people already have a conceived notion of what things are happening in their neighborhood or wherever the planning project is going to happen. And so people are already kind of predisposed. But if you just kind of give them a basic set of things that's outside of that normal kind of area that they're understanding about, they kind of think about it differently, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's also I don't know if you've seen this. There's actually a Lego planning on Twitter. I think it's international folks, but maybe it's Dutch. A couple of Dutch folks that are put together, like they make a scene and they take a picture, and it's like 3 foot clear in your bike lane or whatever it is, and so they do all these like mock-ups of transportation like policy stuff in on the Twitter account, which is really
Is
fun.
that the group that's been advocating or petitioning Lego to include bike lanes in design and protected bike lanes in Lego design?
That's a different group. So the
Okay.
Dutch Twitter folks, I think, are, and they're well, maybe they're not Dutch, but they're European. The Lego Twitter folks are different from the advocates. So there's other advocates. I think it's a Danish bike advocate group who is advocating to Lego that they should make the bike lanes more realistic to what actually happens in Denmark in design. And it was interesting because that was another piece of article that we shared actually in the newsletter too. And the Lego group spokesman came out and said, we don't talk about political things. And it's like, okay. And then everybody got really mad because it's like safety and bike lanes are political, which
Yeah.
they obviously
Yeah.
are, but the way that
Well, at least he didn't say, "Well,
responded.
no, we use the American design for infrastructure."
That's very true. At least they didn't do that. And there's an argument about whether they should use the Dutch design or the Danish design. There's kind of a back and forth sometimes between those two. So interesting things. All right, next up, governance structures have long tails. Sociologist Robert Putnam spent years trying to figure out why the northern, central, and southern parts of Italy were so different after the creation of regional governance in the 1970s. He found the split went back to the 1100s, when guilds and other organizations formed long before any government currently in existence, showing how social structures from so many years ago still impact governance to this day. This was by James Bradshaw in Mercator Net. So Robert Putnam is famous for his book Bowling Alone that talks about the decline in social capital. I think most planning students have probably heard of it, at least, unless many have probably read it. A book from the 90s that still, I think, resonates with a lot of people on the topic of social capital. It has its detractors, but it also has its proponents as well. Thinking about how the loss of bowling teams has led to a drop in social capital. Not just bowling teams, but kind of social clubs and those types of things. Kiwanis
The
Club
bowling teams were representative of
it was representative of the whole
community in that
Right.
way.
But before he'd actually wrote that book, one of his first books was actually he went to Italy and studied this kind of structural change between the 1970s, kind of governance rework in Italy of regional governments and how that was actually implemented in different regions around Italy. And I thought this was really, really fascinating just because of the idea that going back to the 1100s, these social structures were so ingrained in these regions from these guilds and other kind of groups that it actually impacted the way that the organization of regional governments in the 1970s, even though there was a new law, how they were kind of implemented and impact cities even to this day. And so I thought that was really fascinating thinking about that from his book, which was actually published in 1993, Making Democracy Work, Civic Traditions in Modern Italy. I actually went and ordered this book after the article because I found it for like $7 on a like secondhand shop or something like that. But I ordered it because I was like, this is really fascinating to me. I don't know if you thought this was as interesting reading this article. I was like, wow, this is something I just hadn't thought about.
I was totally fascinated by it, and I Bowling Alone was such a great book. I mean, Social Capital was you said it was, the article says it was published 20 years ago. So that was when I was at UC Irvine getting my PhD. So it was the talk of everything, and I think there were several theses and dissertations that were based around social capital. We were talking about this book, and so it was, and it's sitting on my bookshelf over here. And so it really resonated, that concept really resonated with me, and I refer to it in different ways, in my career, but I had no idea he had done this work, and it really is that's the foundation of the work he did then studying the US communities. it also struck me as super interesting because we just finished watching that the first season of that Stanley Tucci series that he did for CNN.
Love that show.
Like Stanley Tucci Does Italy, or I can't
Yeah.
remember what the name of it is.
Searching for Italy with Stanley Tucci or something like that. Yeah.
Something like that.
Love that show.
And he commented in that series a few times about the contrast between southern Italy and northern Italy, and not only the economics and some of the kind of the mindset of the people, but the culture. I mean, all of it together. They're two very different regions, and even though it is, the same country and under the same system of federal government, but it's fascinating. I think it's super fascinating, and it also made me want to go to Italy again.
I always want to go to Italy, especially after seeing that Stanley Tucci series. I kind of was like,
yes,
I would do a YouTube show for free.
That's right.
Go to Italy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, he's a big fish in a little pond when he goes over there too. He's got such nice clothes too. Like he walks over, he's like, he doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
He just fits. It's not like he stands out though. He like fits in like he's supposed to be there. Which he's Italian, obviously, but like I don't know. There's something about him going there, and it's different from some of the other. We watch a lot of cooking shows, and I felt like it was like. What was the other one? I watched Bobby Flay and Giada De Laurentiis. They have a show. I'm not a huge fan of Bobby Flay. I like Giada, but like their show was so much different than theirs because it was them kind of going and kind of infiltrating, whereas Stanley felt like more like he was learning and being part of like just kind of immersing himself rather than kind of coming as an outsider. I don't know. And Giada's Italian too, so it's just like a different feeling to it.
It's along the same. Stanley Tucci's show was along the same vein as Anthony Bourdain's.
Right.
No Reservations.
Yeah.
In my mind.
And you can't replace Anthony, obviously,
No.
but I think Stanley felt like he could do Italy because of his connection there.
Yeah.
As a kid and his family connection.
But back to the
yeah, exactly.
the analysis.
You were going to the food shows.
We're talking about. Yeah, I'm so hungry. I actually have some pasta waiting for me, but no, it's really great to hear that you ordered the book because I thought the same thing. Like, oh my gosh, this is what I would want to read this, and I would want to dig into this analysis. I think it's super fascinating, and then also. It reminded me, I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago here in Arizona, and it was, gosh, I got to look up the details, but there was a presentation that was given that was a fairly recent survey done within the past year on kind of the state of the future in Arizona. And it had some positive aspects, like people, like the media portrayal of Arizona and division and politics and everything like that, and what people the survey had different results than that. But one of the things that did make me sad about the survey, not only from what like the result from Arizona, but how it compared to nationally, was how few people do something. There was some question about what do you do, how frequently are you doing something for your neighbor? It's something along those lines. And it was a depressingly low number for both the state and the nation. I was like, wow, and I thought of bowling alone, that that's just unfortunate. And that's something, if we could look to change that, what impact could that have in other areas?
Well, there was a paragraph in this piece that was, I think, kind of connected to that in a little bit, in a little way. Like it says, Putnam and his colleagues found that the establishment of regional governments helped to bring back about a remarkable ideological depolarization, coupled with a strong trend towards more pragmatic approach to public affairs. It appeared that dealing with issues of governance at a regional level helped both right-wing and left-wing politicians to moderate their positions and reach accommodations. Public support for the regionalist reforms was also found to be strong. So it feels like some of these, this kind of allowance of regions to have more regional governance. And I think England's kind of going through some of the same stuff now as well, with kind of the devolution to some of the bigger cities around the country, because it's such a kind of a national government run type of place, right? England and Italy are kind of seems like they were similar. If Italy before some of these regional things, and so I think the phrasing of it, the depolarization, kind of made my ears perk up a little bit, because I was like, oh, that sounds like something that we could use, because things are getting real polarized on a national level. And at a city level, that a lot of the officials don't even run as you understand where their leanings probably are, and maybe they're endorsing a national candidate or something like that. But they don't run as a Democrat or Republican. They just run as on platforms of like things they'll do, rather than I'm part of this group or I'm part of that group. And so I think that there's some kind of there's something appealing of this regionalism to me. And the idea of that. And I think it connects back to what you were talking about in terms of the neighborliness and, what you can do. And the thing about, living on this street for since 2006 is that I feel like I know a lot of my neighbors. We kind of know their habits. We know what to listen for, and whether, and there's a connection there. And I think that, that's kind of missing sometimes when you move in, move out, or if you don't necessarily, maybe you don't even want to kind of connect with your neighbors for reasons. Maybe it's because of polarization or other things, but there's something about kind of making that connection that makes me feel more at home. And I think there was also another piece that we talked about that I might have talked about actually on the last podcast, about kind of how rural and urban areas are starting to feel disconnected from each other, not just here in the United States, but actually all over Europe and around the world. Whereas this globalization kind of policy of capitalism and kind of the connections through global business are actually making the world's cities actually more closer to each other than maybe their own peripheral hinterlands and the rural areas. And so the rural areas of different countries are feeling more like the rural areas rather than actually kind of coming together as the urban and rural areas. So there's something to be said for that as well. And the belonging that people feel as well. So that belonging is getting reduced because of that. So all these things are tied together in a way to kind of, and it probably goes back really, really far. And I don't know if we can trace it back to the 1100s here in the United States, obviously not. But we can kind of make these connections between this globalization and the idea of regional governance, as well as the idea of neighborliness as a whole, in my opinion. All right. So a couple of other short items here. Nothing as kind of a bigger discussion as the previous four, but I just kind of wanted to throw these in because I think they were really interesting. So Metro Transit plans to expand a pilot that provides all-you-can-ride passes to residents of apartments, condos, and multi-unit buildings with their rent. Randy Meyer participated in the residential pass program during a 6-month trial in 2019 and said she's thrilled it will be coming back this fall. So basically, Metro Transit in the Twin Cities has teamed up with some apartment complexes to give out free passes to their residents. And folks here with Transform, Ann Chang, my brain is not working, and Ann's going to be really annoyed that I can't remember. Anyways, Transform had done the program.
Glad that you're going to talk about this because, keep going.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
Yeah. So the Transform did a program about this, where developers would basically, they could reduce their parking requirements by giving transit passes to their residents. And a lot of new buildings would get certified by Green Trip, which is the kind of the umbrella thing that Transform put together to kind of advocate for these projects. So if they agreed to reduce their parking requirements and give bike parking and give transit passes to their residents, then Green Trip on their behalf at a city council meeting would vouch for them and say, hey, I know that there's not going to be as much parking, but they're going to do all these other things. And we say that this is good. And so this kind of reminds me of that. And I think Metro is going to put this into more places, I guess, next year after they finish the pilot up this fall, which is really cool because I think one of the things that people, when they move to a new place, that's the easiest time to change their behavior or to change the way that they get to work or travel, etc. And so if you can give them an idea of a transit pass or you could give them a behavior change mechanism, I think it actually makes it more likely that they'll maybe not always take the bus, but maybe sometimes consider it because they have this free pass and they might change their behaviors just a slight bit that might reduce VMT.
We are working with the city of Austin right now on their Smart Movers program, building on the work that Alta had done with them in that regard. And that ties into that concept that you just mentioned in terms of reaching people when they've just made a change in their residential location, to educate them and inform them and engage them and encourage them to consider alternative transportation in that move. But this was a really interesting program and great to read about, and I was very interested to hear the reference or read the reference to the fact that other programs had or do exist. It sounds like maybe what you're saying is had in Oakland and San Jose, because I don't work on transit programs enough to know the history of everything that's happened. So that I was trying to get information from my colleagues about what that history was. And it sounds like it's a transform program that they must be referring to.
Yeah, they had a travel demand model, and I think actually it was Urbemus was the demand model, and I don't know if it was. I think it might have been Nelson Nygaard that was working on it with them. I know Jeff. And Adam Millard Ball, when he was at Nelson Nygaard, I think they were working on it. I think they were on the advisory group. I think I was on the advisory group for about a year. It was Ann Cheng, and they put together that. This was back in 2008, maybe 2009. It was a while ago that they started the program. So it's really interesting that other places are now starting to think about that. I'm surprised it didn't take off earlier, but better late than never. And it's pretty cool that they're doing this. So during the 6-month pilot, more than 60% of residents living in the 4 test buildings used the residential pass. Bus and train trips taken by residents who did not have the monthly pass rose by 78%, says Michael Krantz, development analyst with Metro's Transit-Oriented Development Office. So that's pretty cool that they were able to get that kind of response. So hopefully after 2022, I think is when the pilot will be over after they do this next round, and then hopefully they'll do it for more buildings. I think about this too, something I mentioned in my newsletter yesterday maybe, or maybe I put it in yesterday and it came out today. I can never remember when stuff comes out, but electric chargers and kind of the infrastructure that we put in to buildings and homes and all those things, it's going to change the paradigm of who provides energy, from the oil companies to the electric companies. And I think that there's an opportunity there from a transportation standpoint to start thinking about giving transit passes to these people who are charging their cars through the utility companies, because the utility companies are also generally, if it's a public utility, it's tied into the city in some way. And utilities are tied kind of as a market mover into cities generally. But if you could tie the transit agency and the public utility together in some form or fashion, that might also be a way to give passes and think about VMT changes from a city perspective. I always just throw these things out there because it's not a fully formed idea, but it's something that if we're going to change the paradigm of energy use for transportation, it might be a good way to think about, kind of like they did with light bulbs. I mean, the utility companies were often thinking about not just providing more power, but reducing demand. And so, if you have a power charge and you're using your car, you'll reduce demand for electricity, even if it's solar on your rooftop, but you'll reduce demand and your spending if you have these other tools like a pass. So just thinking about it that way, kind of being outside the box a little bit.
One thing that was interesting to me the article discussed, or at least the property that they referenced, it has a fitness center, party lounge, theater room. It sounded like a higher end unit. And I mean, obviously this is a type of program that could also be a very great benefit to providing increased affordability of transportation and transit to people that are in affordable housing or in housing and they're strapped in other ways because of housing being so expensive in areas. So there wasn't any discussion about that aspect of the program, but I hope that is a component as well, or an explicit component on equity within the program.
Well, can you imagine, like, if you could do, like, if you had all of the apartment managers in a city buying bulk transit passes and you give them at a discount because everybody's buying them. I mean, think about what that might do for A, ridership, B, usability, and then also reduce costs for low-income riders, but just through that bulk pass program. I think that some cities do that; they sell bulk passes for that purpose. But think about if every apartment complex in the city was buying up passes, just kind of like when we had on the election night show, we had folks on from Montana, and he said that they were one of the things that kept their bus company going was that the local the local health center, the hospital bought bulk passes, and so that was how they could make their service free. So that's a huge part of, I think, transit agencies, and they might have to be a little bit going forward after the pandemic, as we start to build our ridership back up, they might have to be a little bit more inventive about how we can get people back on buses and trains.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, Paris has lowered its speed limit. To promote safety and reduce noise pollution in the capital city, Paris has reduced speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour, 18 miles per hour. The penalty is a fine and 2 points from your driver's license if you go over the speed limit. So this article is fascinating to me. It was in RFI, which is I think a French news service, kind of like AP, the Associated Press, and it was way more balanced, I think, than a piece in the U.S. would be about the same topic, because there was lots of kind of hand waving from the Automobile Association representative, but then the local government official kind of like waved it off and was able to explain why that wasn't a big deal. Like they stated studies and all this stuff.
Do you feel like the ship has sailed in Paris, and that's why? I mean, there's been so much change for, as I say, soft transport, in support of soft transport, that
I think that's part of it, but I think there's just more of a constituency for it. There's less people that own cars in the city, and so with cities that have higher rates of car ownership, you have less advocates for active transportation modes, whether that's walking, transit, biking, etc.
Yeah. I mean, that's what rolling. I mean. Like, there's not going to be. Maybe there is a vocal minority that would be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't have this happen," but.
And we found out today even that the mayor of Paris is probably going to try to run for president, and so of France. So obviously she doesn't think it's hurting her electability to do all these things as she's done over the last so many years. But I think the press officer, whoever it was that was kind of defending this, made some good points about safety, about vulnerable pedestrians and cyclists, about refuting studies that the automobile group had done, or at least talking about average speeds and the energy usage through stops. I mean, they went through the whole gamut of arguments about this thing, and they were like, okay, I can do 30 kilometers an hour. That's good. Let's go.
Well, for the UN Global Road Safety Week this year, the campaign was Streets for Life, #Love30, and it was a global campaign for communities to move to 30 kilometers per hour or lower for streets, and that I think that's 25 miles per hour or lower. So I think it's certainly consistent. It's consistent with the policy changes that have been made in Paris under her leadership, and it's consistent with the road safety messaging and policy actions that have been promoted globally for the past couple of years and for several years, and hopefully we'll also start to see some change. We're seeing little bits of change in like that in the US city by city, and then hopefully we'll see it more at a state or federal level at some point. And there was just a article earlier today on the new president of the NTSB board. She was appointed by Biden, but she's really pushing for a safe systems approach in transportation safety in the U.S. and U.S. policy, which would be a huge shift for safety policy in the U.S. if it could affect change.
Is it Homendy? Jennifer Homendy? Is that right? Okay, yeah. She makes me grumpy sometimes because she's doing this really good stuff, and then she also advocated for bike helmets for everybody. She was the chair, right? Yeah.
Chairperson.
Chairperson, right.
Yeah.
So before, she was on the board before. She wasn't the chair before, but she was on the board before. And there was this whole thing about bike helmets and
Yeah, they
Yeah.
did have that a few years ago, but
yeah.
um,
But we're getting there. We're getting
yeah, I mean, if you could create a safe system, then yeah, maybe she'd drop her bike helmet stains.
Maybe so.
No. But yeah, I mean, I'll say that now after reading these articles today, my travel post-COVID travel, I want to go back to Italy. I want to go to Minneapolis, St. Paul, Paris, and find this Solarpunk utopia. Wow.
I want to go to the Solarpunk utopia too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to go back to Paris. Was there in 2019, early 2019.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's a wonderful, wonderful city to hang out in. Also, the French countryside and the little towns are really cool too. Great food, everything's great. Minneapolis is a great city. If folks want to go, they should definitely go. It's definitely worth your while. Not in the winter; it's cold. If you're not used to that
Go
stuff.
to New Orleans in the winter because that also is a great city.
That's right. Yeah, go to New Orleans in the winter, stay for Mardi Gras, and then head up to and Jazz Fest, and then head up to Minneapolis and hang out in the summer. It's a nice place, and definitely lots of really cool innovations going on there too. All right, so that's it for the news. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, even last week. So we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month will get you our bus-only scarf. We're starting to think about new scarves, different scarves, design. Do you have any ideas maybe for design? Anybody have any ideas for designs for a new scarf? We have the bus-only scarf. Do you have any thoughts on a new scarf that we might want to design or put together?
Well, I think you could make a great design that it's like a shared use path or something like that, and bicycles and pedestrians and families and cargo bikes and blah, 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 all traveling down the length of the scarf.
Would it be blue? What's the color of the pavement? I have red pavement for the bus only scarf, but would we? What's
green is.
We have green for the bike paths. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the
I
color.
don't know.
I don't know. It's something we're thinking about. If you want a bus only scarf, you can get one for on Patreon for $10 a month, or you can go to theoverheadwire.com if you want one now. But we're thinking about some new scarves too. So maybe
could you make it a little lighter weight for those of us that live in slightly warmer climates? We can wear it as a decorative scarf.
Yeah, maybe like one of those kind of the sheer ones,
Yeah,
those like the light ones.
Yeah.
I was watching a soccer game recently, and it was like it was Austin. I think it was like 95 degrees, and everybody was wearing scarves, and I was like, that's rough. I think that might be a little too hot for me. I'd have to get a lighter one. Like I think Portland. I think I have a lighter one of a Portland Timbers scarf, but yeah, it's definitely necessary to do that. All right. So listener questions and comments. We don't have any questions and comments this week, but if you have a question or comment, feel free to comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or you can listen or you can email at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Puppies and Butterflies is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in other sections. Aside from building the computer with Nancy's help, been watching a lot of TV. What are some of your puppies? Do you have a Puppies and Butterflies for this week, Tracy?
I need to remember that you're going to ask me this and to look
Ted
something
Lasso?
up. Yeah, I mean, well, Ted Lasso is great. Gosh, it's a great show.
It is a good show.
What is another show that we just started watching on Netflix, Norseman?
Norseman?
It is
like Norway Norseman?
The Norway Norseman. Yeah, back in the day of the period when they still went and raped and pillaged. But it's like
1,000, maybe 1,100, 1,200.
Yeah, but it's sort of
1,300.
Princess Bride-ish, Monty Python-ish. Like it is a funny, quirky show. It really is. So we just started watching.
It's funny and quirky. I might have to check that out. I like the funny, quirky.
Yeah,
as long as it's not too serious.
No, it is not serious at all.
Yeah.
It's a perfect addition right now. And then I guess speaking of puppies directly, my family has become fond of watching YouTube videos of pit bulls. And so all the cute and wonderful things that the bully breeds do. And It's very funny. So like there was one video where they talk a lot, and so I was sitting next to my bully Lily one day, and she was just upset that I wasn't engaging with her, and so she was like,
Yeah.
So I recorded her. I said, all right, this is going to be a YouTube submission.
Yeah.
Be careful, Missy.
Yeah, the dogs generally, the talkers are real interesting. The huskies are super talkers, and there's one on Instagram, Bunny, the dog Bunny, that I can't remember the name of the channel, but she has these kind of buttons that she types on, and so she can say words, and she's getting to be a really huge vocabulary. It's actually kind of scary, actually, what the dog. And then she just got a puppy brother sister, and kind of the process for her kind of taking in the new family member has been interesting. But there's no talking there except for the buttons, but all the other ones they seem to talk. My mom's dog talks too. Whenever we're eating dinner and we're eating, she can hear that you're eating, and then she doesn't talk. But if you're talking, then she'll talk because she knows you're done with dinner and it's time to let her go and do her thing. So But yeah, we've been watching What We Do in the Shadows, and Lego Masters is coming up, the finale of that, and Oregon Trail, the Miracle Workers series with Daniel Radcliffe and Steve Buscemi. They're really good. Season 3, it's this year's Oregon Trail, but usually they have a different story every year, but it's hilarious. It's a hilarious show.
It's funny you mentioned What We Do in the Shadows, because we were camping this weekend with friends, and one of our friends is really connected with my son Angus, because Angus has gotten into anime and manga, and he games, and my friend is a GI doc, and successful in that regard. But I mean, he talks to Angus about how the things he did when he was growing up, and it's a lot of similar things that Angus is into. And they were talking about TV shows, and so our friend mentioned, oh yeah, there's this show What We Do in the Shadows. That'd be, and Angus like, I watch that. Yeah, it's really
It's funny. It's super funny. I've never been a big werewolf vampire type of person, but this is just, it's total comedy. It's Taika Waititi. I mean, he's just a funny guy. So that's what we've been doing. Well, Tracy, where can people find you online?
They can find me on Twitter, though I'm trying to be a little less engaged because they can find me on Twitter. I'm in LinkedIn, and that's where I am.
And wherever you find your Tracy's.
That's right. Yeah, that's where I am. Or they can find me outside, hopefully walking around.
Yeah, that's a good thing too. Well, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire, and thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. Thank you, Tracy, for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here again. I won't take as long next time to come back.
And we'll see you next time.
That's right. Bye, all.
Talking